I'm Nick Dunlop. I'm the Secretary General of the Climate Parliament, which is a global network of members of Parliament and members of Congress around the world who share an interest in solving the climate problem before we see a real global climate catastrophe, and in particular promoting the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, which is perhaps the single most important thing we have to do if we're going to solve the climate problem, because 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions that the world is producing come from fossil fuels. And we have to stop burning those fuels in order to have a chance of preventing runaway climate change.
So you have members of Parliament who are members of your organisation who promote renewable energy, is that right?
That's right. We're working with members of Parliament in quite a number of countries around the world, particularly in Europe, in the Arab region, Sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. But we will be starting next year to work in the Americas as well, to see how we can help them to put in place new laws, new budget priorities, new policies that can encourage private investors to put more money into building solar and wind and hydropower and all the other sources of renewable energy to rapidly increase the supply of renewable energy to power the world economy.
And are you funded by renewable energy companies?
No, our main funding comes from development agencies, and most of our work is done with members of Parliament in developing countries, but our work in Europe, for example, is funded by family foundations, people like that.
So your mission statement is to promote renewables on behalf of the environment in order to bring down emissions?
That's right. That's right. I mean, there's a lot of things that they're discussing here at the climate talks, and I'm sure they're all important. But fundamentally, this is actually quite a simple problem. If we are going to prevent out-of-control climate change, we have to get the world economy off fossil fuels. As I said, 2/3 of the emissions come from burning oil, coal, and gas. And there is only one source of energy that can replace the fossil fuels at the speed and scale that is needed, according to the climate scientists, and that's renewable energy, in particular solar, wind, and hydropower.
So why aren't we doing it?
Well, that's a very good question, and one does wonder. I suspect the reason is partly to do with political inertia and partly to do with the political power of the fossil fuel industries. But what's striking to us, having done a series of what we call international parliamentary committee hearings around the world over the last several years, where we bring together perhaps 20 MPs at a time from different countries to look at how they as lawmakers can help to solve the climate problem. What's striking to us is how easy it is to solve the climate problem. It's not actually that difficult a problem. We have the technology right now in solar photovoltaic panels, solar thermal power stations which use mirrors to concentrate the sun's heat, boil water, drive an old-fashioned steam turbine. Hydro dams, which are an old technology, we've got dams running today that have been going for a century that produce power very cheaply. And wind turbines, both onshore and offshore. We have all the technology we need to produce all the renewable energy we need to power our existing uses of electricity, electric vehicles to replace petrol engines, and home heating and cooling. If we build the transmission infrastructure, the long-distance transmission cables that allow everybody to plug into the areas where renewable energy is really abundant, and that's the deserts for solar power, for example, which have brilliant sunshine pretty much 365 days a year, mountain ranges for hydropower, windy seas and coastlines for wind power. We need to be doing everything we can locally and nationally in every country to harness our renewable energy locally and nationally, wherever we are. But to supplement that, we need to be able to bring in the rest from the deserts, the windy seas, and the mountain ranges so that everybody has access to as much renewable energy as we need.
There's a lot of frustration at this meeting because a lot of people share your view and feel that they're not being listened to, and the world isn't moving to these renewable energies because of the fossil fuel lobby, which sponsored these talks and is had a World Coal Association summit and seems to be, getting involved in a lot of levels. Do you agree that progress is not being made because the fossil fuel industry is using its power and perhaps to stop action where it's needed?
I have absolutely no doubt that that's the principal roadblock. My first job many years ago was working for an environmentalist Republican congressman from California. After I left university in my native New Zealand, I went to Washington to do this job. And I've been working in the parliaments of the world ever since. Let me tell you, the power of the fossil fuel lobby in the US Congress and in other parliaments, especially in the major industrialized countries, both the rich countries and the industrializing developing countries, is enormous. They spend just a tiny fraction of their astronomical profits to buy enough politicians that it's very, very difficult to make this transition politically. We have the technology. Technically, it's no problem at all. Not only that, but they collect from the taxpayer directly and indirectly, according to such a radical institution as the International Monetary Fund. In a report earlier this year, the fossil fuel industry collects almost $2 trillion a year. That is the equivalent of about 8% of the world's combined government budgets in subsidies and tax breaks of all kind. The only reason why fossil fuels seems cheap is that their lobbyists are such experts at collecting money out of the taxpayer's pocket, your and my pockets, to prop up this old industry that now threatens the future of the human race. And one of the things we need to do is save ourselves $2 trillion a year by removing those subsidies and tax breaks. And then we'd find that the shift to renewable energy would happen a lot faster, and we'd save a lot of money. It's not just the fuel subsidies, which are hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and the direct subsidies like that. It's the hidden subsidies, the tax breaks. And one of the hidden subsidies that the IMF drew attention to in its report this year is that the fossil fuel industry is not paying the costs of the health care that their industry causes to be required. That is to say, according to the World Health Organization, perhaps as many as 3 or 4 million people a year worldwide are dying as a result of air pollution from fossil fuel burning. Here in the European Union, where we are now, the European Commission estimates that it's in the order of 500,000 Europeans dying every year as a result of fossil fuel pollution. The healthcare costs for those 500,000 dying people this year are astronomical. And what the IMF is saying is that this is a subsidy. It's a subsidy that we pay as taxpayers. We pay from our taxes or privately for the health care that should be reflected in taxes. It should be the fossil fuel industry that's paying these costs through taxation. Since they're not taxed, it's a subsidy. So, there's a lot of hidden costs like that nobody really talks about that actually mean that fossil fuels are a lot more expensive than they look.
Do you think this meeting, this climate change meeting in Warsaw in particular, has been taken over by the fossil fuel industry? Progress has been limited because of its involvement?
Well, I haven't been here for the whole 2 weeks. I wouldn't say it's different from any other climate negotiation. It's not that they take over the negotiations precisely. It's that they wield such enormous influence in the parliaments and congresses in all the national capitals back home that it's not possible politically for most governments to commit to the kind of rapid transition from fossil fuels to clean energy that is needed. You've also got to keep in mind, if I may be blunt about this, that there's a structural difficulty in the climate negotiations, which is that you've got 200 governments negotiating by consensus. They have to agree, all of them, on whatever is agreed here. And some of those governments are really, look a lot like oil companies. They're oil states that have one industry, and you can understand that they might not be that keen on closing down the industry that produces 95% of the money for their government budget. So it means that the agreements that come out of the negotiations are at a fairly low common denominator that all those governments can agree on, which means that what really needs to happen is action at the national and regional level to accelerate the shift to clean energy, to go faster than the agreements that come out of the climate talks. The talks are very important. Whatever can come out is important, and everybody needs to keep trying to get the best agreements possible for 2015 and beyond. But we mustn't say that's where the key decisions are being made. The key decisions are being made at the national level in all the national governments and parliaments, and we have to see the agreements coming out of the UN climate negotiations as a minimum beyond which we have to quickly go if we're going to solve the climate problem.